On the 11th of August 1979, 303 yachts set sail on the Fastnet Round the Rock race. In the storm that followed, 24 boats were abandoned, 5 sank, 136 crew were rescued and 15 sailors died, leading to one of the biggest overhauls of offshore racing culture in the history of the race. The Grimalkin is a 30-foot, half-ton sailing yacht designed by Ron Holland and built by boat builders Camper and Nicholson. In the run-up to the Fastnet race of 1979, a 6-man crew sailed several offshore races together in preparation for the Fastnet Round the Rock race. They're all experienced sailors and they know the boat well. On Saturday, the 11th of August, 303 yachts set off into predictable and mild conditions. On board the Grimalkin are skipper David Sheehan, David's son Matthew, who's 17 years old, Nick Ward, Mike Doyle, Dave Wheeler, and Jerry Winks. The Fastnet Round the Rock sailing race is one of the oldest and most prestigious events in offshore racing. The journey starts at Cowes in the Isle of Wight. Yachts make their way around the southwest of England and up into the Celtic Sea. They round the Fastnet Rock southwest of Ireland's Cape Clear Island, then return to Plymouth. The 600 nautical mile race takes around 6 days to complete. It's a grueling endeavour that tests the will and experience of any sailor. In 1979, the race is governed by a set of rules called the IOR, the International Offshore Rule. The IOR is a set of points to measure a yacht. After taking these measurements, a yacht is given a handicap. The handicap allows a vessel to be assigned a class, which means yachts of a similar class can compete against each other. It also gives a way for yachts of different classes to compete on a somewhat equal footing by applying the handicap. Over some years, designers pushed their designs to extract the fastest possible yachts that the IOR rules would allow. The IOR was measured at points, which allowed designers to prioritize those points for measurements to reduce the yacht's handicap and to be more liberal in their designs outside of those points to optimize for speed. There's a lot more to it, but essentially two large aspects of speed for a yacht are the length of the waterline and the resistance below the waterline. A yacht sails faster the longer the waterline and the less resistance there is below the waterline. A slow boat produces a short wave. As the boat speeds up, the length and height of the wave increases. Once the length of the wave reaches halfway down the length of the waterline, the boat has to climb its own wave. The faster it goes, the larger its wave becomes, and so it has to climb a larger wave, which requires a higher speed, producing a larger wave. That means the waterline effectively acts as a speed limiter, and once a certain speed is achieved, relative to the length of the waterline, it can't go any faster. Under these rules, the length of Grimalkin measured stern to bow at 30 foot, she would have a lower handicap than a boat that measures 40 foot. However, the designers are able to widen the width of her beam at a point that's not measured and effectively increase the length of her waterline. Not only that, but they can decrease the size of her keel underwater so that she has less drag underwater. Yachts that follow these design principles are often wider and shallower, within reason of course. In the right hands and the right conditions, Grimalkin is a real contender. She has an experienced crew and skipper. The weather is good for sailing and the race gets underway. By the 13th of August, the fleet are in the Celtic Sea. Some of the larger, faster vessels have already rounded the rock and are on their return leg. The sea is starting to build as the weather picks up. The wind is getting stronger and the skipper David Sheehan decides to put a reef in. A reef is a set of loops on the mainsail. When the wind picks up, a sailing yacht becomes overpowered if there's too much sail exposed to the wind. So you drop the sail a little and tie the lower section of the sail to the boom through the reef loops. Over the coming hours, David would tie in all sets of reefs before bringing the sail down entirely. The day before, David had tuned in to listen to the shipping forecast as he did the same time every day. The shipping forecast is a daily weather forecast sent out over the airwaves at a specific time. All vessels can tune in and listen to the forecast and get the most up-to-date weather information. In 1979, this is the only way to get weather information, and so the Fastnet fleet would all tune in and get the same information, then tune out and continue their daily sailing routine. The broadcast communicates high winds of 45 knots that any seasoned sailor would consider strong but bearable. Later in the day, on the 12th of August, the Weather Bureau released a gale force storm warning, but because this was outside the regular broadcast time, the Fastnet fleet and David Sheehan didn't pick it up. More than that, the storm front is followed immediately by an extreme low pressure, and the direction of the wind shifts from southwest to northwest. David and his crew are accustomed to some uncomfortable weather, and so they set about stowing away loose items. They make some food to sustain themselves and settle in for some bad weather. All the men come out on deck and attach themselves to the boat using a tether that's clipped both to their harness and to the boat. The high wind has already created waves of significant heights. When the wind shifts direction and increases in speed, this sends two sets of waves on a collision course with each other. The result is short, sharp, high waves colliding with each other from different directions, resulting in even higher waves. Hour after hour, the sea state increases until the boat does one of the most terrifying things a sailor can experience. As the Grimalkin descends down a wave, her bow, the front end of the boat, digs into the trough of the wave in front of her, and her stern, the back end, rolls right over the bow. This is called a pitch pole, and it's the first of many for the Grimalkin. When the wind was coming from one direction, the Grimalkin was able to cope. But when the wind shifted direction, another force entered the equation. When a wave moves in the same direction as the water current, the result is two forces moving in the same direction. The wave created by the wind rolls over the water. A sailing vessel would experience this like a rising swell, but not a breaking wave. The swell becomes higher but doesn't necessarily break like a wave breaks when it hits the beach. When the wind changed direction, some of the Fastnet fleet were hit by wind moving in the opposite direction of the water current. The effect of wind moving in the opposite direction of the water current is that the current pushes the base of the wave underneath itself, and the result is a wave that breaks over the top of itself in the same way as someone sweeping your feet out from underneath you. And now the Grimalkin is fighting waves from different directions that are building on each other's forces and water current that is causing the waves to break over the boat, forcing its stern to pitch pole over its own bow. And now the Grimalkin must contend with the final forces that will seal her fate. Boat designers shifted their focus to a wider beam or midsection to increase the waterline and make the boat faster, as well as a shallower draft or the depth of the boat below the waterline to decrease the resistance under the waterline. These shifts in the focus of the design allowed for a faster boat, but they also shifted the center of gravity upwards on the vessel. Stability on a boat is measured in the range of stability. A boat with a range of stability of 150 degrees means even if the boat is fully inverted, the action of the waves will rock her enough that she'll right herself. But the Grimalkin has a far lower range of stability, approaching 90 degrees, which means it's very easy to get knocked down, and once she's rolled or pitch-poled, it's dumb luck if she rights herself. Now David and his team begin the fight for their life. They have all the odds stacked against them, and it's starting to show. The crew are exhausted by the relentless storm. They're starting to show signs of hypothermia, and they've all been through several near drownings as the boat has pitch-poled through the waves. David decides he needs to send out a mayday call. He and his 17-year-old son Matthew head below deck to make the call. Nick, Mike, Dave and Jerry stay on deck. They start to bring the life raft into the cockpit with them. The cockpit is the section of the yacht where the steering wheel is and where the sailors are sitting. They don't launch the life raft, they simply bring it out ready to launch if needed. Below deck, David makes the mayday call, then he and Matthew brace themselves for yet another knockdown. The storage in the boat is not built for a fully inverted boat, and so debris is loose in the cabin. A tin of food hits David in the head and fractures his skull. Matthew drags his dad back into the cockpit. Another wave knocks the boat over and she doesn't right herself. Matthew is lucky to find an air pocket underneath the overturned cockpit. After some time trying to keep himself afloat, Nick appears in the same cockpit. The crew are strapped to the boat by their harnesses. This is helpful to keep them inside the boat, but now it's also holding them from swimming out from underneath the overturned boat. Then the mast gives way and shears from the boat. Almost immediately, the center of gravity shifts. The mast is no longer the weight holding them upside down, and the boat rights herself. Matthew helps to pull his crew into the cockpit of the boat. He stops for a moment and notices his dad's body floating face down in the sea. He knows he can't pull him aboard. He wasn't clipped in when the boat capsized, and now he's drifting away, never to be seen again. Nick and Jerry lie lifeless in the cockpit. Mike and Dave immediately throw the life raft into the water and pull the cord to inflate it. They shout for Matthew to jump into the life raft. Matthew turns to Nick and Dave. He's torn between staying with the boat and the bodies of his two friends, or evacuating to the life raft with Mike and Dave. In the heat of the moment, he jumps into the life raft with the two able sailors. Over the hours that follow, the life raft drifts away from the Grimalkin. Nick Ward and Jerry Wink's bodies are battered as the storm continues its onslaught. Then Nick starts to come to. He scans the Grimalkin for signs of life, but it's just him and Jerry. Nick writes in his book, Left for Dead, that at the time he regained consciousness, Jerry was still alive. I'll leave a link to the book below. It's one of the best accounts I've read of the Fastnet 79 disaster. By the time the Grimalkin is found by a Sea King helicopter, Jerry is dead. Over the years to come, the culture in offshore racing changed. The IOR rule for measurement evolved to a more holistic view of a vessel's readiness for offshore racing. The IMS, or International Measurement System, eventually replaced the IOR. The IMS takes a broader look at the entry to a race, including the emergency systems on board, the team's completion of previous qualifying races, and the range of stability of a vessel. More than that, skippers became more ready to call off or delay a race if the weather was predicted to be too extreme. In a number of subsequent races, skippers opted to abandon a race after the start and run for shelter at the nearest port when severe weather approached. Crew became more conscious of safety with simple things like buying their own life jacket and harness instead of relying on the boat's kit. You can't necessarily say that all these things are directly attributed to the Fastnet, but it certainly played its part. Going to sea will always be a dangerous endeavor, but if you compare the Fastnet 79 disaster to the Sydney to Hobart 98 disaster, which had a similar if not worse storm system, you can see some differences. In the Sydney to Hobart 98 race, only 18% of the fleet were knocked down to 90 degrees compared to 48% in the Fastnet 79 disaster. And as few as 3% were completely inverted compared to 18% in the Fastnet. Of course, you can't compare one storm or race directly with another. In the end, if you set sail, it's up to you to understand the limitations of your vessel and be prepared for whatever conditions come your way. I'll leave links to my sources in the description.